be clear, this is going to be a discussion at the governor's request, though I assure you that most of the burden of the discussion will fall on the governor, who has some things of substance to say on a number of subjects. Because we are just coming out of an election season in which his hopes and the hopes of many who looked to his candidacy were not fulfilled, I want to begin with a question which is, on the gauge of things, narrow, but nonetheless may have something to say about the future. You used two words as you left the scene. One was corrosive and the other was toxic about the state of politics in the United States today. I was trying to be charitable. He was being charitable. That being the case, is corrosive and toxic a phrase which is inevitable in the future, and if it's not, what will change it?
Bonnie, it's a pleasure to be with you, as it is this terrific North Carolina crowd. This is a fabulous campus. And for the students who are here, I just want to remind them that they have such a unique head start in life. What you're learning here, the people you're associating with, the relationships that you're building and developing, is such an attribute to you and will serve you well in life. And I want you to leave these back doors when this evening is up, and I want you to all kind of pursue a living commitment to this great country of ours. And I was reminded when Lori was providing that very thoughtful introduction, what Lori forgot to say is that if I knew anything running about the subject matter, I wouldn't be sitting here tonight, I'd be somewhere else. She charitably bobbed and weaved around that one. But I'm reminded, Lori, that we were born roughly about the same time in Palo Alto, California. So my one grandfather was head of Palo Alto Harbor and later mayor of the city. He was a Republican, but he was first and foremost an American and a mayor of a great town. Can you imagine a Republican mayor of Palo Alto today? My other grandfather worked right down the road, and this gets to the point that I'm trying to make on you, in a place called Los Altos, where he was principal of Los Altos High School. Now here's what I remember about my grandfather Huntsman, because he was a great reprobate and a truly unique personality. As you walked out of his home that he built himself after World War II, I used to go visit from Los Angeles to mow his front lawn every now and again as a kid. He had a picture on the wall as you walk out the front door. A Republican, my grandfather was a school teacher, of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. I'll never forget that, walking out of his front door. I always see the president and the vice president, even after Kennedy was out of office. Why is it that at one point in our recent history, we all felt good about putting our president, regardless of our political affiliation, regardless of our background, we were proud to put our president on the wall? That was my Republican grandfather, who was a school teacher. And I say we can learn a lot about our past as we move forward. And somehow, some way, we've got to remember that we are all on the same team, first and foremost. Before we're Republican, before we're Democrat, we're all Americans, and we forget that part of the conversation. For the younger people who are here, yeah, they're going to have to take forward this spirit of rebuilding the United States, first and foremost as Americans, and less as partisans. But the race was an interesting experience, Bonnie, and for those of you who haven't run for president before, it's an intimidating and sometimes daunting journey. My wife, who's a Floridian, gave me some advice as we started. She said, let me just be very straight with you. We've been married 28 years. She said, if you pander, and if you sign any of those damn pledges, I will leave you. And I figured at that point in time that life was going to become pretty difficult through those early primary states. got worse when a guy named Michael Moore went on television and said, that Huntsman guy, he seems pretty reasonable. And I knew we were toast tonight. And then Bill Clinton's girlfriend got on television not long thereafter and said, that Huntsman guy, he seems pretty unhidebound. I think he's a Republican I could actually vote for. South Carolina. People say, how'd you get out to such a feeble start? And I say, boy, if only could have walked in my shoes in those early months. But it was a journey that did remind me. So here's where we came from. Governor of a great state. The most open, transparent job in the world. In our state capital, in Utah, you can wear guns in the Capitol. I mean, people walk right in the office, guns on. Meet with the governor, you don't need a magnetometer or anything, it's just wide open. You go from that environment to probably the most compartmented job in the U.S. government, that of being the United States ambassador to China, where you're behind barriers and walls, you work with some of the great professionals in the second largest embassy in the world. You speak in kind of a different language, literally and figuratively. And you pursue a different set of interests for the United States in the world of diplomacy. From that on to the highly circus-like stage of running for president, where you're supposed to use a completely different lexicon and think in different terms and kind of be out there and all over the place. And I was reminded through it all, particularly in watching this nation from 10,000 miles away, which stimulated our interest to begin with, that we sometimes forget that this nation, despite our challenges and difficulties, we're sometimes our own worst enemy. We're sometimes hypercritical of who we are and the journey that our nation is taking. And when you see it from 10,000 miles away in Beijing, you're reminded of this light that shines, these values of our people. And I don't say that in any way other than completely respectful of our nation's tradition. I don't care whether you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Vegetarian, whatever. We have a new brand in the world. And you begin to understand that when you live overseas and certainly try to slug it out in the world of diplomacy. We're known for liberty, democracy, human rights, free markets. And I don't care how you want to slice it, which end of the political spectrum you come from, that's where it comes down. And you see the light shine in ways that really does move people, inspires human rights dissidents to the point of tears, and still changes history of the world. And you can't help but come from that experience 10,000 miles away, jump into a presidential campaign and enjoy every single day of it, even when people are yelling and screaming at you. The blogs are filled with all kinds of negativity and people want to shout you down and you say, this is who we are. It's part of the American journey and experience. And all that's great. But in the end, let's remember that we still have to make the system function. We still have to make it work. And that's what's been done by people of goodwill and good common sense, who somehow meet in the middle from differing perspectives and grind out compromise to where the American people benefit. And that's the part that we've lost sight of. When compromise is seen as analogous to treason. Now, I compromise every day of my life. I can't deal with my 5 daughters without compromising on a regular basis. I can't stay married for 29 years without compromise. We had to compromise all the time. In the business world to make things happen. And in politics, how on earth do you expect to get anything done? Unless you sit down with people on the other side of the aisle, you join hands and you put something out on the table that can be synthesized and massaged in some sort of compromise.
I would say that purged the system of toxicity and corruption. That was a good start toward the hard job. Listening to you, I was reminded of the memorable times in American history in my own time, which names arise as those who reached across the aisle to make something important happen. Arthur Vandenberg, a one-time isolationist who makes the Marshall Plan possible. There is great old Everett Dirksen, somewhat seduced by Lyndon Johnson, voting for the Civil Rights Act in 1964. I use those names because they came out of the conservative wing of the Republican Party. Who do I turn to today, my good American and Republican, and say they will be the Vandenberg, they will be those who will reach across the line? Because you're right. How do we make this place work unless you make the compromise work?
The system today doesn't incentivize results. And as I said on a morning show very, very early this morning, morning show, somehow, some way, we have to figure out in our political system how to incentivize and reward results. I mean, people actually come together with good ideas and throw those ideas before a legislative body and achieve results. That's the way the system works. Today, you're incentivized to go to the experiments of your party. You get on TV. You get to go to fundraisers. You get to send out all the screaming emails to your constituents. And with a system that incentivizes polarization, and you can't expect people to move to the center. And people say, well, we don't like centrists. I say, I don't care what you think about centrists. Don't call them centrists. Call them pragmatists. Call them doers. Call them people who want results. That's what the system lacks today. So, the Evan Bayhs of the world, the Olympia Snows, the folks who in earlier years would take a handoff from right to left and synthesize legislation into something that was doable. They've been blown out of the system. They've left because there's nothing more to do, not even a budget after 3 cycles. And there's no machinery in the middle of our legislature to actually take those ideas from the respective corners of politics and synthesize it into public policy.
Again, I think about, while listening to you talk, the people who once tempted me to go far across the aisle and to do more than simply talk about the need for coming together, but coming together. Remember my father, who voted as many times for a Republican for president as he ever voted for a Democrat, which I found offensive, but he found to be absolutely necessary in a nation like this. But I also think about the state I grew up in and the region I grew up in which compromise was considered betrayal of the essence. And we have a lot of politics in this country today in which compromise is considered betrayal of the essence. How did we get here? You said incentivize change. Where do we reach into the levers and get out of here?
Want my honest take on that?
Yeah, I want your...
I'll never get elected doc answer after this one. I think money in politics has become toxic. I want to get back to the toxic time. Super PACs and the big money, they incentivize bad behavior in politics. I've been on both sides of this debate. I've been for a wide open system. I've debated a closed system. And all I can tell you, having knocked on endless doors, raising money to run for office, the system is broken. You can get people of average intelligence in a room together and say, come up with a scheme. We can finance our campaigns. And there's no way that they would come up with what we have today. It's an abomination. And it's an embarrassment to 350 million people who deserve better.